Good afternoon and welcome to Finding the Plot. My name is Sebastian Whittington-Smythe. Have you ever suffered any trauma? Do you have any loose ends that keep you awake at night? For me, both of these things came in tandem when I played Ride to Hell Retribution. When I first played it, I couldn't get my head around the game or its message. It did bad things to me. And to my great shame, I abandoned it. And I always complete my games. Well, last episode I did get my much needed closure and I beat the game. And today's game deals with very similar themes. It deals with trauma, obsession, insanity, and also a little bit of redemption. That game is Deadly Premonition. In Deadly Premonition, we follow FBI agent Francis York Morgan through everything that I went through playing Ride to Hell Retribution, but with zombies. So, sit back, relax, and punish your liver as we find the plot of Deadly Premonition. Deadly Premonition was developed by Access Games and released in Europe in October 2010. Yes, I'm looking at the console release, not the director's cut. If there are any story changes in the director's cut, then crap. The game was directed by Hidetaka Suehiro, otherwise known as Swery65, who has been compared by many to Suda51. Oh boy, if he's anything like Suda, I'm really going to have to lubricate my brain for this one. And for any of you curious as to what I'm drinking a Miraval Côte de Provence Rosé from France. And you know it's French because it's called a rosé, and not a pink. See, I'm not just a game expert, I know all about wine as well. Deadly Premonition has received polarising reviews, either praising its quirky gameplay and unusual story, or slating it for the same. Now, you know me, I love quirkiness, so let's see what this is all about. The game begins with an introduction that shows two children, Isaac and Isaiah, with their granddad playing happily in a forest until they find this. I'm sure she's fine though, that snake wants to help her. Or turn me on. I'll have to think about this. Now, I'm not a doctor, but this girl, Anna, is clearly dead. You can tell by the lack of life. The scene cuts to the grandfather speaking to the police while the children play. Uncaring, cold, detached. A ladybird flies away and reveals the town of Greenvale. Here we see how the death affects the town. All of these characters will be important, but I won't jump ahead of myself. And then the game begins properly. And I confess that there is a motif running through the game that I just cannot quite pin down. You see, the game opens with a television blinking to life, and electrical equipment firing up. Isaac and Isaiah are sitting on thrones and say,
Sorry to keep you waiting. It will start soon.
With the line, "It will start soon," it brings forth the air of performance, anticipation. Our hero, York, is obsessed with TV, with films and entertainment, and it's carried on with every section of the game, not just being divided into episodes, but when you reload a save, you get a
previously during the investigation. These puppies are...
And the final boss, and this isn't really a spoiler as such, says, "The final curtain shall rise." So already I'm looking at this game as a performance, and I don't know, is it a TV show? I'm not so sure, but I don't think so. The other thought I had is that perhaps this is York's police report. Now hear me out. The events of the game have clearly happened because York is essentially narrating them during the previously segments. And when you save, you do it by calling the bureau on the telephone and giving your report. Perhaps the game is what York wrote. Either that, or we're completely playing the game in real time from York's view, and he views life as a TV show. Any of these theories could be correct, and hopefully the light I shed on the game by going forwards will help you come to a conclusion of your own. York speaks to somebody called Zach, asking him to respond, and then you have to press a button to make him respond. Zach is perhaps the strangest thing about Deadly Premonition, and his explanation will come at the end, so be patient. York also tells Zach that the murder was in the country. The next thing we know, York is driving down the road while looking at his laptop for case notes while discussing the crime.
They both need each other. It's called interdependency, and they both know it.
Wow, this sounds super complicated.
No, he does terrible things to Tom. Nasty, even sadistic things. But that's fine, as long as that's what Tom wants. Think about it. His actions. He's always asking for it. It's his partner's job to fulfill that need, and Jerry knows that. Proof? Well, in the Tom and Jerry show, they live with each other. Hello? Hello?
Oh yes, you see, York is obsessed with television, any sort of entertainment media, be it film, television, music. The chances are that York will reference it, and his obsession is plain to see. He does it when he's either driving or when he's talking to suspects. Honestly, you'll see that later. He talks about the case that he's been following and says that the murders in Greenvale seem connected to this case. He has some red seeds in a bag that must be evidence from other cases. York then mentions his scar, saying that a Catwoman wannabe slashed him with razor blades under her nails. He then lights a cigarette while driving, and this is really responsible because between this and his laptop usage, he's going to... Oh. See? And that Axeman? He's important. York comes to and uses his profiling talent where he basically thinks about clues he's found, and the first time he does this reveals massive plot spoilers, but only if you already know what's going to happen. Oh, Swery, you're such a cad. Of course, if we treat this as York's report, it makes sense that he knows everything at the start, because he could have amended the early stages of his report to match what happened later. You know, like when people tell a story and lie about the past to fit the present. Or perhaps this is his deadly premonition of the title. It could be, but he hardly seems to display much more psychic talent in the game otherwise. Yes, he sees odd things, but I can explain all of that in good time. Or it's to set the scene for the player. As this level is basically a tutorial, the most important thing right now is the zombies. Yes, zombies. York mentions that he's being welcomed and wants Zack to handle the meet and greet. Sure enough, he runs into some zombies, or shadows as the game calls them. I hope you've noticed the rain, by the way. This isn't a mess up in my capture, the rain is actually purple.
Purple rain? Purple rain. Hold the phone, people! I've solved the murder. I know who did it. It was Prince! It wasn't Prince.
As York leaves the area, red strands block his return and he finds some red ivy or something. And yes, I know that red ivy is a bit of an oxymoron, but whatever. He then says that his coffee warned him. Strange. He soon meets up with the deputy sheriff, Emily, who says that George, the actual sheriff, will meet him soon. When he first meets Emily, he acts a total creep.
She's easy on the eyes. Definitely worth a trip to the primitive world.
Remember, he's saying all this out loud. He says that she was worth the trip to the primitive world, which means that he's been there before. How odd. But he also makes note not to tell her about it, in case she thinks he's a psycho. Interesting that he's saying this is an earshot of her. It shows how oblivious and awkward and strange she is, but at least at the moment he thinks he has some sort of restraint. It's at this time that George shows up, and they do not get along at all. It's the old power struggle of who's in whose jurisdiction. And that's the end of the prologue. All we've established so far is that there's been a murder, York's a bit weird, and there's zombies and purple rain. Episode 1 begins in what they call the Red Room, where York can seemingly get physical items. He heads through a door and meets a child who shows him how to evade shadows by holding his breath. York then wakes up in the hotel. He notes that the symbolism of his dreams has intensified, and he swears that he's seen the child somewhere before, but can't remember where. Investigating the hotel gives rise to some little things that are unusual in this game. York can change his clothes, shave, wash his clothes. If you don't shave, you grow a beard. If you don't change your clothes or wash, you become smelly. York also becomes tired and needs to sleep, and if he doesn't eat, he becomes hungry. And all of this affects his performance. This attention to detail extends to other things too. You can check the weather at the hotel, you can order as much coffee as you like, and when you drive you have control over the indicators, headlights and windscreen wipers. Yes, even the wipers, they don't actually do anything, but there you go. There is a lot of attention to detail, but only really around areas of interest to York. The lesser used areas are quite barren. Why do I bring this up? Well, it's because whether this is York's police report, or whether it's us living York's story as he saw or remembered it, it makes sense that these are the things that he remembers. This is his game, his story.
But this is my story!
No, Tidus, York's story. We see what's happening in his head, what he does for every second of his day. We get information about the people and things he finds interesting. His immediate suspects are named, but there are other nameless characters who are given no notice at all. We even listen on his many film-obsessed conversations with Zack, whoever that is. And to be honest, considering how self-absorbed he is, it makes sense that he only remembers or notices the things directly relating to him and his day. Have you ever seen a guy like York who takes much notice about anything outside his immediate sphere of interest? If this was his police report, it would be detailed in the extreme about mundane things, but have huge holes where he just zoned out chatting to Zack on the road, rather than paying attention to what he was doing and where he was going. Look at what he was doing when he crashed his car. It would also make sense that someone so interested in film and TV would decide that his report would be presented in episodes, and the B-movie presentation is something and the B-movie presentation is somewhat poetic as well. A low-budget B-movie TV police report by a guy who loves Ed Wood and classic monster movies. Of course, that doesn't really explain things like the shadows or zombies, but we haven't even got started on them yet. York goes for breakfast and meets up with Polly, a sweet old lady who runs the hotel. Polly has terrible hearing and a dirty mind, leading to quite an amusing exchange.
Polly, it might help to hear you better if you could sit a little closer.
Oh my, Mr. Morgan, you're embarrassing me. So early in the day, too. I think I'm a little too old for you.
And I still love my departed husband. May God rest his soul.
Now tell me, that wound on your face, what happened?
Let's just say I had some trouble during the last case I was working on. I'm sure it'll heal. It's just a flesh wound.
No, I should have started a drinking game for every film reference that's in this game. Oh well, that was Monty Python and the Holy Grail, so here goes nothing. A shot for every film reference. I hope there's a lot more film references. Drink responsibly, kids. You may have noticed that the music is super loud and drowning out all the dialogue. This is another clever design trick. It's showing how when people talk to York, he doesn't really listen. Everything else in his mind is distracting him, but this could also mean that he's not hearing things as they're being said. Can his view of the world actually be trusted? Again, things happen later on that will make your view of York change. Oh, York also believes that he sees the future in his coffee, and he sees the letters FK. Apparently they're significant.
Clear as a crisp spring morning. F.K. In the coffee. I knew I could count on it. Never fails.
Now then.
He drives to the police station after breakfast and chats about Attack of the Killer Tomatoes and DVD bonus features, all worthy topics of conversation. Inside he encounters Thomas, George's camp assistant. Thomas mourns Anna's death and says that he wants to help. York remarks that Thomas's demeanour is a clear contrast to George's, and together they would make a good cartoon. At this point I had to turn the music down so I could hear the dialogue. Anyway, York needs to get the case notes, but they're locked away and Thomas has lost the key. Finding that key is something that York calls a big case. Clearly his perception of everyday inconvenience is as odd as the rest of him. Or perhaps he perceives himself as a hero and so gives his all to help no matter how small the problem. I will again address all of this later. He eventually gets to files and meets with George and Emily to talk about Anna. She used to work at A&G Diner, and her mother lives off the insurance from her father's death. Emily says that Anna led a normal life, and York says that that's exactly what a teenager doesn't want. He says that things are making sense, then he stops and extinguishes his cigarette on his plate, drawing comments about his rudeness from Emily, showing again he's oblivious to social standards, and then he eats some biscuit, prompting this reaction.
This is a good biscuit. I've never tasted a biscuit this delicious.
Where in town can I get these?
Well,
Everything is showing us York's eccentricities, so we understand him, or at least think we do. They need to go to the hospital to look at the autopsy, and notice how purple everything is? This is important. By the time they arrive, it's raining. Inside they meet Fiona and ask where Dr. Usher is. Fiona is reading a book that basically mirrors this case. Now, I have tried to find a way to tie this into the plot, but I just can't. But if I don't include it, I'm sure that somebody will point that out. So here, it's included. Do with it what you will. After solving puzzles, York finds Usher and, oh yes, these signs. Considering York's mental state that we'll find out about, I like to think that these signs were early warnings to us. Allow me to read them for you. Yes, your doctor told us. That's you, heir to be our patriot. Accept our enthusiastic congratulations and well-wish on your coming event. And be assured that we have a very personal interest in your case, and have already taken steps to see to tie that your stay in the Palo Alto Hospital will be pay us a social visit before you enter. We want to mend and agree you for yours. Save your life. Like your life, Warhammer. Registration and fill. Room 6. Therapeutic Seawat. Blood. Dollarine collection. X-ray room, Hello Kitty. Chest X-ray. Fafa my girl. Polyclinic. Machines. Exam of internal medicine for men and women. You see, I think that these signs were actually written in proper English, but York just can't make it out. This is how he actually reads things. He's not well. But anyway, they're now with Usher and they see the autopsy. York calls it a crime of passion because her tongue was bitten out during a kiss, leading to a rather strange and dramatic exchange.
Not particularly, but I am man enough should the moment call for it.
George, how about you?
I'm very passionate, yes. Especially when it comes to women. But I don't see what that has to do with anything.
George, the perpetrator is just like you. He's passionate about women. He's a passionate kisser. This was a kiss of death.
The perpetrator bit off Anna's tongue.
I honestly cannot do these guys justice. York's dramatic attitude makes him look like a parody of a TV hero, and I think that's what he thinks he is, what he wants to be. York discovers that Anna had a seed in her throat, and this allows him to assume control, as it's now a case under FBI investigation. See, he has lots of seeds too. Oh, and he solves this chess problem. You know, it's almost like he's Ace Rimmer.
What a guy.
He leaves the room and is now in his strange zombie world, his primitive world, which now twists the layout of the hospital. When he reaches the lobby, the room returns to normal. George and Emily are waiting for him there. I would like to take this moment to go on another tangent. This sequence shows that the zombies or shadows and their realm are imaginary, entirely in York's head. Firstly, nobody else saw the creatures. The hospital changed shape, which nobody noticed again, and when he materialised in the hallway, nobody remarks that he'd teleported, indicating that he must have walked into the room, rather than dumping himself from another dimension. While there, Harry Stewart, a mysterious wheelchair-bound man in a mask, has his manservant Michael tell him some cryptic messages.
Mr. Francis York Morgan, with each rain our town goes mad. To our disdain, unpreventable, so sad. So says Mr. Stewart.
The next stop is Greenvale Forest Park, where they can speak to the witnesses who found the body. Before he goes there, he has lunch with Thomas, George and Emily. It turns out that Thomas is a good cook and that Emily is awful. This is when George makes a joke that prompts a laugh from York that can only be described as drug-induced.
Oh, did you hear that, Zach? Not for two-legged animals. I'll have to remember that.
Okay. Finish up. We need to meet the twins over at the forest park.
That's right.
I know you're probably thinking, oh no, not another review where the explanation is drugs. But it isn't. It's something else, but the symptoms are clearly quite similar. Hallucinations. This. Is that the laugh of a sober man? I think not. On his way to the park, he meets Olivia, a friend of Anna's, and gets hung up on her name and goes off on one about Olivia Newton-John. Film reference! The tangent confuses her, but he manages to pull back on his obsession to talk about the case. He also bumps into Quint. What sort of name is that, anyway? Quint acts a bit shifty and wonders why the FBI are there. He sarcastically says,
"Yeah, because local enforcement can't shine their own boots, right?"
Good point. You can't always count on the police now, can you?
Which York takes literally. He calls Quint by his name, which shocks him. He also mentions his significant other, to which Quint responds,
"You mean Becky?"
This incredible, nigh on Derren Brown level of personal reading impresses Quint enough to open up. York then explains how he knew how to guess Quint's name.
Okay, Zach, I'll tell you how I knew his name. He's got a small Q on his hat. That was the only name beginning with Q that I could think of.
Well, York is the FBI agent with a background in criminal profiling. If anybody would know that the only name beginning with Q is Quint, then he would. Oddly enough, though, considering York's obsession with films, I would have thought he would have gone with Quentin, after Tarantino. Film reference.
Wait, that wasn't a film reference. Oh well.
When he gets to the forest, he questions Jim Green, the grandfather of Isaac and Isaiah. He tells him that the children found the body, so York insists on speaking to them. The other adults feel that this is a bad idea, but York overrules them. When he speaks to them, they... Look, my words cannot do this justice, just listen to how they talk.
Anna, she was so pretty. She had a red dress on. Her hair was shining. Bright gold hair. There were lots of animals around her. Squirrels, weasels, and a snake. A real snake. We didn't know until then. But we know now. Anna was the fairy of the forest. She was a goddess.
They're clearly not well in the head. There's something very, very wrong about them. They say that Anna was a fairy, the goddess of the forest, because she attracted animals. They even say that she smiled when they found her. Now that's a downright lie. Look, she was dead, eviscerated. There is not a single hint of a smile on that pallid, cadaverous visage. Were the kids hallucinating too? And saying she's a fairy, I am all for lying to children to make life simpler, but that's the cover story the adults came up with? I guess they have problems as well. Actually, yes, they do, but again, I'll talk about that later. York examines the area and finds some clues. As he searches, the ground is waterlogged, and mist rises from the floor as it rains. The clues that York finds are an upside-down peace mark, a wooden splinter, and stiletto heels, to which George talks about the killer putting stiletto heels on and prancing around in front of Anna before kneeling and debasing himself. I'm not even making that up for comedic purposes, that is exactly what he suggests. And York's response to this is actually pretty sarcastic.
George, you certainly have a vivid imagination. An interesting theory. Don't you think, Zach? What was his name again? That Hollywood producer. That's right. Joel. We really ought to introduce George to him, Zach.
York has different ideas. He says that the killer prayed in front of her, but the stiletto owner is somebody else, and she took whatever Anna was holding. The prime suspect for this is an art dealer who is currently out of town, so while they wait for her to return, York wants to know more about the wooden splinter, and they suggest that he goes to the old lumber mill. When he gets there, it's still raining. He insists on going in by himself, saying that everybody in the town is currently a suspect. As much as this offends the other two, they abide by his wish. Inside, the shadows attack again, and the inside of the building has been twisted once more. He reaches an altar where Anna was killed. It indicates that some sort of ritual had been taking place when she was murdered. Inside the control room, he receives a phone call during which he is asked, "Where are you hiding?" I will count this as a Scream reference. Now, this may not have actually happened, because notice how things only get really weird when it rains. Notice the purple tinge in the area. York finds a reversed peace sign on the windows, confirming that the killer was the same one who strung Anna up. After exploring, he encounters a tree that is emitting a purple light or gas which seems to be fatal. He shoots the tree and it deflates and dies and leaves a hand-shaped doorknob behind. On the walls are many bloody handprints which, if they're real, indicate that someone went crazy and violent in this place. At least one person. It's rather creepy if you stop to think about it. He sticks the hand into a door which then grabs his hand, and then opens. This is one psychedelic game. And then he gets attacked by the Axeman who made him crash his car. This chase leads to him hiding, holding his breath as the dream child told him to, while the killer searches. This bit is kind of weird, and again I think it's partly imagination. If this was real, then the killer would surely have searched inside every unit. His axe would have done more damage when thrown when he gives up, rather than just floating in front of it. Do I believe that the killer exists? Yes. Did he chase York at some point? Certainly. Is he in this room? No. That's the effect of this strange gas that the tree was giving off. York soon gets chased again, which culminates in a standoff where the killer tears his raincoat. The killer eventually runs off and York takes the raincoat as evidence. Outside it's stopped raining and York is back to reality. Emily says that it's odds to see the raincoat because nobody goes out in the rain. She doesn't understand why, but George explains about the raincoat killer, who only appears on rainy nights. He says that it's a foolish superstition, but people believe it, and as a result, they don't need raincoats. He asks to see Emily and George's back, saying that the killer has a peace sign on his back. Neither of them have the mark though, but George is very scarred, but refuses to talk about how he got them. York arranges a meeting at the community centre. He talks about the murder and gives the townsfolk advice on how to stay safe. He mentions the raincoat killer myth and says that perhaps the killer is mimicking him. During this speech, a mysterious, sultry woman walks in. It's Thomas's sister, Carol. Harry Stewart also shows up and talks about the purple fog. York then chats to the townfolk. They don't say much useful, although he does meet Carol for the first time. She talks about Anna and says how cheerful and lovely she was, but that she was also an airhead. We also see Anna's terrifying alien face. A goddess of the forest she may be, but a goddess to be feared. He also meets an arms dealer who I don't think really exists, but I'll talk about him later. When he speaks to Harry, he says that the town is soiled and to remove the source from which it boiled, the proper must do the proper at the proper time. He says that he needs to speak to him, to pay attention to the signs and premonitions, and he also blanks George. Harry certainly seems to know something important about the town, but why does he speak so cryptically? Perhaps he doesn't want the others to understand what he's saying, lest it expose him. Oh, and he also meets Siguorney, someone whose mind is too far gone.
Oh my pot is getting cold. Hey, mister, My pot is getting cold.
You are... who?
What are you saying? I'm Siguorney. Siguorney.
Afterwards, York says that he needs to do a progress report to head office, and then goes to A&G Diner for food. The team bonds a bit, and he talks about the worst killer he met, and how he seems to almost admire his sadism. Emily comments that York is like an elite agent out of the movies. This may be a passing comment, but it's quite important to understand York's eventual motivations. That night, it begins to rain again. A woman, Diane, gets out of the red car, which also doubles as a mobile kennel. Inside is a man with a red plant. A red plant shaped like a peace sign. Meanwhile, York dreams of women pouring him coffee. I have those same dreams, except it's wine. And I'm pouring myself wine. And I'm naked.
You didn't need to know that, but now you do. And you're aroused. Don't question it. It happens. Why, I'm aroused just thinking about it right now. And that's why I'm single.
He also dreams of Becky, who just says,
"My name is Becky."
Because she's a Pokemon. He drinks his dream coffee and sees a door open. In his dream world, there's a map of the US where presumably all of the previous murder cases were, and a certain figure is positioned on each location. When he goes to the door, he meets a blonde-haired child in a colour-inverted room. He says, "That's me when it happened," and then he wakes up. Upon leaving his room, he meets Forrest Kaysen, the man who dropped Diane off. He's a sapling salesman and has a dog. He calls York Agent Scarface and says that he's at the hotel because he always comes here. He likes to relax in the town and soak up the atmosphere. The dog, Willie, takes a liking to York. Forrest gives York a sapling as a gift. He asks York about why he's here, and York explains the case. York asks Kaysen if he knows about the seeds, and he takes it to mean that it's a gardening question. He replies that he's the only one who can make the saplings grow. When Kaysen leaves, York remembers his coffee saying FK, and he becomes suspicious. That morning at breakfast, he mentions to Polly that he saw Kaysen, and asks if he gives a sapling to everyone. She replies that he only gives them to people who he feels comfortable with. Diane is at the art gallery, and so York goes to investigate, and of course it's raining and purple outside. York insists on going inside by himself to detect subtle reactions from Diane. As soon as he gets in, he finds Olivia looking at some art. She likes trees.
I like trees.
He arrives at Diane's door and encounters an argument. Carol storms out and Diane invites him in. They talk about the argument and she explains that Carol is jealous about who she's slept with. They discuss the murder too, and she says that she was with Nick at the time. York says that Diane is not a suspect, but he has a bad feeling about her and leaves. He informs George and Emily that Diane was talking to Nick during the murders, and says that they need to confirm the story, so off he and Emily go to speak to Nick. But before he goes, he looks in a window and sees Forrest Kaysen inside. Emily informs him that Forrest spends a lot of time with Isaac and Isaiah. At A&G, York goes to have lunch with Emily before questioning Nick. While there, Mr. Stewart turns up and eats a weird sandwich. This, of course, leads to sandwich-based hijinks.
Sounds like the sinner's sandwich. Self-inflicted punishment to atone for past sins. He's setting an example.
You should try this wonderful lunch. It's more than a delicious, tasty crunch. So says Mr. Stewart.
I can't believe it. This is fantastic. It's really good. Olivia, I'm sorry, but can I change my order? I'll have what Harry is having.
Nick confirms that he was at the bar talking to Diane that night. Nick is evasive, so they talk to Olivia. Olivia confirms Nick's story. During this conversation, she mentions that she isn't interested in art, so York asks her why she was at the art gallery. He posits that she was there to see Diane, and she gets shocked and says to meet her in the back after closing time. While waiting, he bumps into Siguorney. I could explain Siguorney right now, but I won't. Let's just enjoy her weirdness.
Tell me, Siguorney, just what is in the pot?
You really want to know, don't you?
Yes, very much.
Well, I'm sorry. I can't tell you. The pot has to make that decision, not me.
Okay. Then I need...
Now, I know I'm stalling explaining a lot of stuff right now, but trust me, the story of this game hinges on the central mystery. And when it's revealed, everything begins to fall into place. If I explain anything now, I will have to explain everything, so please bear with me. Olivia meets up with York and says that she was jealous of Nick and Diane. She followed them to the bar and waited to see where they would go afterwards. They went to the gallery. She thinks Diane saw her and that her eyes flashed. The next day, Anna was dead. Olivia tried to confront Diane in the gallery but chickened out. She mentions that Nick has been seeing Diane a lot these days. As they question Olivia, Emily gets a call saying something has happened at Becky's house. Thomas has gone to see what's going on, but George says something about the raincoat killer. It starts to rain and Olivia assumes it must be Nick. York shoots off to investigate. At Becky's house, Quint is outside. He's just saying, "Oh, Becky," and won't respond. When he gets inside and is by himself, he sees decay and shadows. York gets attacked by the raincoat killer but manages to survive again. He then finds a red dress. Then finds a mirror with a reversed peace sign on it. And then a red seed. Soon he has another run-in with the raincoat killer, but again hides. He eventually gets to Becky's room where everything goes back to normal again. There's blood on the bed. The shower is running. He rushes to the bathroom to find Becky alive but strung up in the shower by wire. There is a bloody knife, but somehow she's still alive. He tries to question Becky, but George, Thomas and Emily barge in. George commands Thomas to cut the wire, but he can't, so George takes over. When George does it, it releases the mechanism, somehow wrapping red scarves around her which break her neck or choke her. She expires. York hallucinates Anna, who seems to be beckoning to Becky. She coughs up red seeds and a key. During all this, Thomas is throwing up. York tries to find something that he can open with the key, and as he explores the room, Thomas sums everything up perfectly.
Oh.
York finds a safe, and inside is a notebook in which Becky wrote an apology. Becky witnessed the murder. She apologised for falling for him.
Him must have been the killer. Him is also a Finnish rock band. I've solved the murder for real. Vila Velo did it. You could say. He was buried alive by love. Yeah! Vila Velo didn't do it.
The strange thing is that the murder would have been solved by now if Becky hadn't insisted on writing in a dramatic, indirect Japanese style, but I guess she was dumb, and that's why she is dead. She says that she took a locket from Anna, and because she didn't want to get caught by the killer, she has given the locket to Isaac and Isaiah to give to Diane for safekeeping. York goes to Isaac's mum and asks where the kids have gone. She tells them that they're with Kaysen at the forest park. On the way, he stops for lunch with the team. This is a solemn lunch until George makes a gaffe that brings levity to the situation. With spirits lifted, they continue the investigation. And it's Siguorney time!
I used to be a teacher, you know. That's when I realized the truth of the pot.
When he stops faffing about doing side quests, he goes to see Isaac and Isaiah and logics them into submission. You see, they refuse to give him the locket because they'd made a promise to Becky, but he says that he's also made a promise to Becky to catch the bad guy, and he can't do it without the locket. It turns out that Carol wanted the locket too, and after they delivered it to Diane, Carol took it from her. And York knows that Forrest knows all about this already, because he was there that night. He says that Forrest Kaysen cannot leave the town because he is now a suspect. The kids ask about Becky, and Emily says that she's a forest goddess like Anna, and will be gone for a while. York hopes that Emily doesn't become a goddess too. York feels that Diane needs more investigation, so they decide to stake out Nick and Diane's relationship by spying on them at the bar and then following Nick. Although isn't that what Becky tried, and look where that got her. As they wait, it begins to rain, and while Nick has shown up at the bar, Diane does not. They check in with George, who tells them that there's no news at the gallery either. George waits, and when Nick leaves the bar, his eyes are white. Now this could be a graphical glitch, or perhaps something's wrong with him. They follow Nick, but then spin off the road as a speeding lumber truck comes around a blind corner. When they eventually get to the gallery, with a comical screech of tyres, might I add, George is waiting. He says Nick never turned up. York is positive that Nick is there, and that there may be a second entrance. He goes in a back entrance and is once again in the primitive world. Inside the gallery, he finds another red tree, which he destroys by shooting off the fruit, then solves a puzzle to release the toxic gas. But this awakens shadows who are resident in the paintings.
Hold on a second. If the shadows are really basically zombies in this survival horror game, and the zombies are resident in paintings, and they're evil zombies, does it mean that this game is Resident Easel? Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm here all video. Don't forget to subscribe and follow me on Facebook.
With the shadows dead, the tree also dies and spits out seeds. Eventually he finds Nick passed out in the atrium.
Nearby, a large red tree statue is dripping blood. Above it hangs Diane. The detectives are banging on the door, and York lets them in. Again, Diane is still alive. Emily tries to push the statue out of the way to lower Diane, but can't, so George tries and the cables begin to break. Emily is going to fall, so York dives and catches her, and George catches them both. Thomas is shocked to find out that she's still alive. He goes to fire his gun, but it's empty.
What?
Who is he going to shoot, and why? They tell him to call the ambulance. Just then, Diane gets up. George looks shocked. She starts to walk towards the statue. She tries to speak about the piece, but without a tongue. What's wrong with her? Why isn't she lucid? Could it be something to do with what had been done to her? Had she been filled with seeds as well? Nick goes to Diane and George arrests him. Nick refuses and shoves George into the statue, which begins to fall. Emily tries to move her, but Diane refuses and clutches onto Emily, holding her in the path of the statue. York shoves Emily to safety, but Diane gets crushed. As Nick grieves, they hear a sound. Willie comes in and asks York to follow him. This leads to Diane's room, where Kaysen is under a trapdoor. York shoots it open and Kaysen wants to know where Diane is, and says that he has a private reason for being there. Kaysen has a kiss mark on his neck and claims that he was there at the spur of the moment. He says that he came to the town to see Diane, to be with her, and talks about his divorce. He says that he doesn't want his wife's lawyer finding out about Diane. He says that he was with her when Nick showed up. She locked him in the trapdoor to hide him, and he's been waiting for her to come back ever since. Afterwards, York catches up with Emily and George. He got nowhere questioning Nick and notes that Kaysen had no way of getting in or out of the trapdoor because it was locked outside. George meets up with York and says that he wants to chat to him later. It's still raining. They go for a drink and George explains how he got his scar. He said that his mother scarred his face. She beat him every time he asked why his dad left, and for many other reasons. The worst was the tree punishment, where she whipped him in the back with tree branches. He says that he blames himself for Becky and Diane's deaths. Afterwards, York confronts Carol about the locket that she took, but she uses the oldest trick in the book. She overrules legal authority with her desire to sing. It really is the oldest trick. Look at any movie where a policeman wants to question a femme fatale who is also a performer. She never gets detained before her performance ends. It's like if York was a Pokemon, he'd basically be an Ampharos trying to use Thundershock on a Geodude. So she goes onto the stage and sings, and York can't do a single thing about it because performer type is completely immune to legal type. At the same time, Emily appears in a sexy dress. George calls it a night, seemingly unhappy to see her. She explains that he's asked her out before. She also talks about her parents, that her mother gave her a locket before she died. That night, after he goes over his notes, Emily shows up at his room for a chat. York talks about how nice his mum was, how his dad never spoke much, that he was an FBI agent. He says that his dad was harsh and did not approve of York's vivid imagination as a child. York explains that his father was one of the first criminal profilers, and that he's followed in his dad's footsteps. Emily asks who Zach is, and he says it's a friend, his only friend. She asks what sort of person he is, and York says that he's never seen his face, but they discuss everything. He says they became friends a long time ago. He has a flashback to someone holding a gun. He says that he was 7 and heard his mother crying. He went to see what was wrong, and saw his father pointing a gun at his mother. He shut his eyes and can't remember much more other than what his dad said. When he opened his eyes, they were both dead. Murder-suicide. But he's okay now because he has Zach with him. He says that he became an agent to find out why his father did it. Remember this, viewers. She thanks York for saving her from Diane, but he says that he doesn't feel like he deserves any thanks. He feels like he was useless for not saving Diane or Becky. Meanwhile, Nick goes mad in his cell, screaming for Thomas, who isn't there. He's with Carol? In drag? With the other girls and the killer? And hanging on the mannequin is the locket. York has another dream where he bumps into Harry Stewart, who warns him that there's no turning back. I wonder, do the doors represent connections in York's brain? When he passes through the door, he sees himself reliving his father's murder of his mother. In his dream, his mother awakens as a shadow and lunges. That morning, he spots an advert that, with deduction skills that would make Adam West's Batman jealous, he connects it to an invitation from Harry.
It says to hurry, and the first letter of each line is H-A-R-R.
Outside, the purple is getting even purpler, and Emily says that she can't find Thomas, that he vanished around midnight. George is going to search for him. At Harry's mansion, Michael brings tea and York comments how well prepared he is, as if he knew he was coming. Michael says that Mr. Stewart is particular about his timing. York refuses tea, saying that he only drinks coffee, but Michael counters that tea with sugar is best admired, prompting York to look into the sugar pot to see red seeds. Harry says that the seeds are to be found in the town in a specific place.
Mr. Francis York Moore, a hint for you to find this location.
It is most crowded and most quiet, and it gives a cold sensation. So says Mr. Stewart.
Based on that clue, that place is obviously the cemetery. Near this many seeds there's a clear fog, and the gravekeeper Brian is like a meth addict or something. These seeds certainly seem to be doing something to the townfolk. So close is York to the red seeds that he's even seeing shadows when it's not raining. They also respawn forever, which is really annoying. He finds the seeds and gets a handful, which he plans to take to Harry. Back with Harry, the old man says that there is a mystery about the seeds and that they're tied to the murders. Harry tells him a story that 50 years previously, after the war, the town got constructed under a clock tower. Soon after, a man in a red raincoat went on a killing spree. York dismisses this because there are no FBI records, but Harry insisted it was real, but a strict gagging order was put in place by the military. Harry was there. He saw the whole thing. Harry says that there is a new raincoat killer. He says that 10 to 20 years ago he noticed that the seeds were special, and so did others, who links them to the raincoat killer. Rumours spread that if you eat the red seeds and kill someone, you'll become immortal. He says that this got passed on from person to person who may have tried the red seeds. He says that the seeds found with the other murders all came from this town, from people who may have tried to test the validity of the myth. But if they're spreading all over the world, people may have planted the seeds to grow more trees. York says that this is impossible because nobody he's ever caught spoke of the rumour. Harry gets back onto the story about the incident 50 years prior. He says that there are still some documents kept in the police records at the station. If he finds them, Harry will tell York everything. It's raining again, and at the police station York is moaned at for wanting the documents, but looks for them anyway. Down below the station, he's back in the primitive world. While there, he discovers evidence that the raincoat killer stole the files to stop anybody from making the connection. He takes this news to George and Emily, who wonder where the documents could have gone. It seemingly happened very recently, and Thomas is the only person who could have done this, as he's the only one for access. Perhaps Thomas had been spying on York, and realised that he'd needed the documents and so hid them. Anyway, York demands coffee, which Emily makes for him in a fishing mug. This leads him to reason that the documents would be thrown into the river, so he goes to fish for them at Velvet Falls. When he gets there, sure enough he fishes and gets the documents. These documents confirm what Harry said about the legend of the seeds, how the sacrifices must not speak while being killed, thus explaining the tongue removal. The handwriting on this paperwork is Thomas's. York is going to take them to Harry, but George refuses, citing how he's a deranged old goat. They feel Harry might be dangerous. York argues that in light of this officially never happening, these documents clearly don't exist. George would much rather spend time looking for Thomas anyway, so York takes him to Harry. When York enters Harry's house, he ends up back in the primitive world, yet it isn't raining. I wonder, could York's exposure to the seeds now make him have bouts of hallucinations even when it isn't raining? Soon he sees a vision of Emily, and then of his father walking up beside her. He goes to shoot her, and then vanishes. So profound and unusual is this vision that even York notices that it's out of place. York uses a secret entrance to enter Harry's inner sanctum, which he uses to spy on the police reports, and seemingly every other top-secret communication system. He even appears to have a direct feed to NASA.
And so Harry tells York the story of the Raincoat Killer, the story that begins to unravel the mysteries of the red seeds. But we don't have time for that now. I've been rambling long enough. So, come back next time, dear viewer, as we witness the shocking conclusion to Deadly Premonition, and I try to explain what actually happened. Spoiler warning, people die.